They found the transmission buried in the noise of Endari's dying sun. The system had long since passed into legend, an outpost once lit by 10 million lives, now a blank space on every modern chart. The sun was bloated and red, a massive hemorrhage of plasma belching uncontrolled solar flares that warped the orbit of its last remaining planet. The planet itself, Endare Prime, had been reduced to a slag world. Nothing grew there. No atmosphere remained. Every city, every spire, every voice, it was all gone, melted into vitrified plates beneath a sky of fire. Yet something endured. The wreckage of the Sarah-T command cruiser drifted along the inner edge of the star's corona, half-sunken into a gravity well it could not escape. Its hull was curled open like the rind of a fruit left too long in heat. Polished armor plating was now blackened, cratered, and stripped of insignia. No transponder, no emergency beacon. Dead. Except, in the whine of long-wave telemetry, a signal pulsed. Not a beacon. Not even a transmission by technical standards. It was the echo of something deeper, recorded in a form not native to Sarah-T protocols. Hidden beneath spectral scatter and heat distortion, isolated by an aging probe's decaying logic core. For syllables carried in a Terran cadence. Sol, en, durs. The probe had barely survived long enough to beam the discovery to a listening post stationed in a nearby Ort shell. The moment the playback was confirmed, it was relayed to the Sarah-T Remnant High Command. Within hours, it had reached Admiral Cell Terran's war table aboard the last functional Sarah-T dreadnought, Ishtaral. Admiral Terran listened without expression. His carapace was dulled and scored by time, once vibrant mandible ridges worn down to skeletal symmetry. He had been a soldier during the collapse, a fleet captain during the diaspora, and now the last of his kind to still command the stars. But beneath his rigid posture, something flickered. He remembered the Terran Wars. He remembered watching from orbit as Earth's ring systems fell, monolithic habitats torn apart, their light extinguished like fireflies in a jar. And then silence. A silence that outlived empires. The playback repeated again. Sol, en, durs. No distortion now. Clean. Filtered. Human. Cell Terran dismissed his aides with emotion. The chamber doors sealed with a low hiss of negative pressure. He stood alone, encircled by hololithic projections of the galactic collapse. Hundreds of systems blinked red, then black. Territory lines erased by the null tide's inexorable sweep. He moved to the console and magnified the signal origin. Endari's sun filled the room, a slow-motion hell of arc storms and burning gas. He stared deeper, his mandibles tight. The words echoed not just in his ears, but through the bones of his species' memory. The humans who had refused extinction like they refused obedience. He whispered the words again. Sol endures. And remembered a Terran child's drawing he once salvaged from a ruined diplomatic station, crude lines, a blue circle, a stick figure beneath a yellow sun. The drawing had outlived the child. He activated a private channel. Begin cross-sector scans. Focus on the Sol vector. Assume deep obfuscation. I want anything with Terran signature, thermal, linguistic, quantum. The technician's voice was hesitant. Admiral, there's no known path to Sol. The last gate collapsed in cycle 607. Find another. Humans are alive. Which means they've been watching. Planning. Waiting. A pause. Yes, Admiral. The Sol system had not seen alien presence in over 200 years. From the outside, it appeared inert, a shell of stellar debris, orbiting structures shattered, with no visible power signatures. Scans showed only residual EM wash and atmospheric irregularities. At least, that's what probes saw. What the galaxy could not know was that everything visible from orbit was a carefully cultivated illusion. Earth had not died. It had hidden. Beneath the shell of a ruined biosphere, a second Earth had been built, layered in ferroglass, stone, and old memory. Vaults the size of continents extended under ancient tectonic seams. Air cycled through photosynthetic stacks genetically derived from pre-collapse redwoods. Light came in shifting tones meant to simulate dawn, dusk, and the uncertain gray of overcast wolf-fronts. Command Spire 0 crowned the deepest chamber, a tower of obsidian steel driven into the mantle like a dagger. In its observation ring, Commander Holt Reyes stood before a panorama of projection screens. He did not blink. The pale light of the room wrapped around him like a shroud. He listened to the Sarah-T signal play again. Not through speakers. Through the neurocrown embedded at the base of his skull, his nerves humming in resonance. Sol, en, durs. Not a call. A reminder. He keyed in the override without shifting his weight. The command spread through subnets like a shockwave. Vault lights flared. Pressure doors hissed open. Centuries of silence ruptured. Cold storage systems awoke with the groan of ancient ice breaking. From the dark across the chamber, Dr. Cora Elian emerged. Her boots were silent against the obsidian floor. In her arms she carried a thin obsidian case, sealed and faintly humming. She did not speak until she stood beside him. "The archivists confirmed it," she said. "It's ours." "No degradation?" "None. A perfect retention. It wasn't just sent, it was meant to last." Behind them, the vault projection updated. Dozens more systems fell dark. Cora's gaze lingered on the map. "They're almost beautiful, the collapse paths. Like arteries running dry." He didn't respond. She continued softly. "I found a Sarati poem in the archive once. About a species that vanished so completely even the gods forgot they had names. That's what memory fights." He glanced toward the bay. "And what wins?" She placed the case gently on the terminal. "What's left behind?" He keyed another command. Deep within Earth's spine, doors opened that had not moved in generations. Magnetic cranes the size of buildings activated. Fuel conduits pulsed with revived pressure. The drydock bloomed with artificial sunrise. And from within the vault cradles, the arcships began to rise. They did not shine. They did not gleam. These were not ships of pride, they were ships of promise, black-edged and quiet. Warforms stitched from moonrock and void steel. Their names were etched not in paint, but in memory glyphs: Nox Bellum, Ash of Titan, Vigilant Mother. Cora moved to the side console. She unlocked the memory archive, a vault of voices preserved from extinction. She passed a hand over one canister. It pulsed blue. Within it, a song from the Valeni swam through static, a species erased in the second search. "I couldn't save them," she whispered, "but I can remember them." Reyes stepped beside her. "You still believe memory matters?" "More than ever." "Even if we lose?" She nodded. "Especially if we lose." Above them, the false stars blinked off. The real sky opened. For the first time in 2 centuries, Earth broadcast its truth. Not a signal of surrender. A flare of defiance. Humanity had not perished. It had prepared. And now it would return. The cold void between Sol and the hollow front stretched across 7,000 light-years, mapped only in remnants and collapse. Once, these routes had been arterial trade veins of the early Federation, pulsing with convoy signals, diplomatic flotillas, and civilian transmissions. They carried laughter, warnings, commerce, and the scattered hopes of thousands of worlds. Now they were dead corridors. Not silence, but something worse. Places where silence had forgotten itself. Every beacon along the route had gone dark. What remained was wreckage and silence layered like sediment, derelict signal buoys drifting without orbit, supply ships fossilized in dust rings, and data packets repeating into nothing. The null tide had erased not just matter, but movement. Everything felt paused except the creeping edge of non-existence that continued to advance. When the null touched things, it didn't burn or twist. It unstitched them. Metal softened into powder, light bent and then stopped bending, sound failed to echo. The closer one came, the more reality lost its shape. Ships lost time before they lost hull integrity. Pilots were known to die with smiles on their faces, memories overwritten mid-thought by absence. Through that void surged the arcship Nox Bellum, a vessel forged in secrecy from the bones of shattered moons. Its hull was blackened with void steel and layered in carbon gold plating that warped the readings of every sensor that touched it. No emission trails. No identifying codes. Its shape wasn't one of elegance, it was brutal, functional, and executioner's blade sheathed in gravitic distortion. 2 sister ships followed, flanking it like wolves at the heel of a silent alpha. Ash of Titan and Vigilant Mother, each a relic of another purpose, reforged for this. They carried no heraldry, no banners. What purpose was there in flag or empire when the stars themselves were dying? Inside Nox Bellum, the last war doctrine of humanity was unfolding, not in noise, but in layers of intent and memory. Commander Holt Reyes moved alone down the primary axis corridor, the ship humming faintly under his boots. The lighting was low and pulsed in a calibrated rhythm designed during the Martian confinement trials centuries ago, proven to stabilize neural activity under sustained isolation. No detail aboard the arcship was accidental. The walls, metallic and matte, held stenciled glyphs in the old battle language, readable only to those trained in the vault doctrines. At a command note sealed by neural lace access, he paused. The interface was a black glass plate the size of a man's torso. Reyes placed his hand against it. Skin met surface. Signals pulsed beneath the glass, scanning bioelectric signature, cognitive resonance, emotional state. It accepted him. Systems began to wake. Behind him, the quiet steps of Dr. Cora Elian came without hesitation. She wore the archivist's high-collar uniform reinforced at the seams with data-threaded smartcloth that adjusted based on environmental data. Her hands cradled an obsidian canister, its surface flickering faintly with biolight. "The Valeni archive is stable," she said, her voice still rough from a week without full-cycle rest. "We've patched in their gesture lexicon, though their syntax depended on multi-spectrum visual bursts and localized send emissions. Without a living host, it's only approximation." Reyes didn't turn. "We don't need to understand them. We need to remember they existed." She stepped beside him, lifting the canister. "Another extinction," she said. "The Melnari Rift just before the edge collapse. 3 worlds. Gone." He took the canister in both hands, felt its weight. Inside wasn't just data. It was culture. History. The last intact neural mapping of a species whose sky rituals had once been studied across 6 academic epochs. Now they were a file. A flicker. Cora hesitated. "Then, the Valeni were the first species I ever studied. I was a child. My father gave me a recording of their sky chant. I thought it was a myth." She looked away. "He died thinking they were still out there. I found their last breath on a dead moon." Reyes held the canister tighter. "Then let's make sure he wasn't wrong." Beneath them, the war deck extended through nearly a quarter of the ship's total volume. Thousands of sealed pods lined its length, each one cryo-sealed, DNA-locked, and fitted with microfilament interfaces. These were not reserves. These were deployments. Human beings engineered not for conquest but for final resistance. Sleeper commandos. Structural saboteurs. Quantum technicians. Memory vault couriers. Each one accepted the role not to survive, to ensure someone remembered they had existed. Reyes walked to the hollow table at the center of the bridge. The map above it was not a standard nav chart. It was a predictive collapse model, null incursion vectors rendered as shifting bands of red and black. At the heart, a darkened bloom, the hollow front. The edge of the galaxy was dying. Cora overlaid new telemetry. 3 weeks. Maybe less before it reaches the Helios array. Deployment window? She adjusted a node. 32 hours. Any longer and we lose gravitational integrity on the array. It's already decaying. And if it doesn't hold? Then memory burns with matter. Threnody, the ship's AI, spoke at last. Its voice was fragmented, woven from hundreds of extinct Terran languages. Fragments of whispers. Echoes of childhood speech. It didn't speak to the crew, it remembered with them. Weapon matrix at 92%. Soul stream alignment nominal. Memory vaults indexed and sealed. Cora nodded. Begin external stream. Valeni sequence in passive ambient mode. The outer hull shifted. Microscopic channels lit up in soft gradients of blue, tracing organic paths like veins under the skin. The Valeni sequence began its silent broadcast, a sensory echo of a world that would never again orbit a sun. It did not scream. It hummed. A low, harmonic lattice only detectable in quantum echo and electromagnetic resonance. They were singing into the dark. Reyes stepped away. Plot to the Helios array. Priority velocity. Threnody answered not in words but motion. The vector well drives activated. Space warped. The arcship vanished. The Helios array appeared in fragments, first as silhouettes against a burning red sun, then as lines twisted by gravitational slippage. It had once been a marvel of solar engineering, built to harvest star plasma for deep system propulsion. Now it was a tomb. As Nox Bellum exited the translation tunnel, the decay became visible. Half the ring had been sheared out of existence, not destroyed. Forgotten. No debris, no field distortion. Just nothing. The rest of the array floated as a skeletal ruin. Collector arms drifted like the ribs of a great carcass. Solar flares ghosted across fractured antennae, feeding data into nowhere. Reyes stepped to the foredeck viewport. Even through the filters, the sun was painful to look at. It pulsed irregularly, distorted by gravitational instability. A star in its last argument. Cora joined him. She carried the weapon core. Filament stabilizers engaged. Ready for deployment. Reyes nodded. No delay. Let the dead speak. A section of the hull opened. Vacuum rushed in. The pod rose, small, spherical, its surface etched with Valeni glyphs glowing dimly with soft gold light. Within, layers of memory lattice spun on magnetic pulses. Reyes gave the command. The pod launched. It spun through the ruin toward the edge of the null horizon, its path shimmering with encoded resonance. No explosion. No radiation flare. It simply reached the boundary and began to sing. It sang of stars born inside oceans. Of homes with no roofs, only layered air and ribbon bridges. Of birthrights given not by blood but by shared dreams. It sang of a people who shaped their language from coral breath and sky shine. And then the null reached for it. The pod stopped. Not decelerated. Not destroyed. Stopped. As if frozen not in space, but in possibility. A tremor ran through Noxbellum. The lights flickered. For a fraction of a second, the crew felt pressure behind their eyes, like memory trying to become thought. The lights inside the pod still flickered. But they did not move. Cora's voice cracked. "It's holding." Threnody spoke again, this time quieter. "Null sheath anomaly detected. Temporal stabilization in effect. Containment confirmed. Weapon has achieved functional resonance." Reyes's voice was iron. "Then we remember with fire." And in the dark beyond the ruined star, the Valeni sang. The war had never ended. But now finally humanity had found a way to fight back. The dust never settled in the vaults beneath Earth's crust. It lived there, clinging to the seams of ferroglass and carbon steel, finer than ash and heavier than memory. It moved not with the wind. There was no wind, but with breath, with the exhalation of ancient machines still shuddering through their half-remembered functions, with the steps of archivists and sentinels, and with the gravity of grief made structural. These vaults were older than memory, born in the collapse, in the ruin of orbital rings and the scream of the upper atmosphere as it ignited and fell in red sheets. They were carved as last shelters, refuges not for bodies, but for history. There were thousands once. Great spans of interconnected sanctuaries beneath what had been nations. Some housed gene arcs, others time-locked relics or minds too valuable to extinguish. Now only 9 remained active. Vault 0 was the first, the deepest. It was not beautiful. Its design bore the brutal clarity of extinction protocol. Collapsed drones had excavated its caverns while continents burned. Shaped charges carved hollows through stone and mantle. Its interior grew intelligent by necessity, autonomous systems shaping form around function until even purpose fossilized into architecture. Every surface had meaning, not grace, not symmetry, meaning. The walls were etched with fragments from orbital hymnlogs, dead tongues designed to chart stars and pray through void. Light shifted in gradients overhead, sunrises not over landscapes, but over ruins generated from fall-era memory feeds. Not comfort, context. This was where Earth kept its dead. Not in coffins, in machines, encoded, archived, interfaced, alive only in light and resonance. Dr. Cora Elian moved through the North Access Corridor on foot. She could have taken the mag rail, but this was ritual. 1 kilometer descending through stone strata and old air. With every footfall, kinetic sensors read her intent, her posture, her silence. Plaques lined the wall, some etched with names, others with symbols for species that communicated by scent or song or temperature shifts. Each plaque linked to a canister below. Not efficient, not secure, but it was honest. At the base of the corridor, a heavy door hissed open. Vault 7. The memory cylinder. Cold, to preserve lattice integrity. Air rich with ionic residue and curated moss scent profiles. The canisters floated in antigrav bands, rotating like moons around a memory star. Each glowed faintly. At the center, the Valeni archive pulsed. Cora stood before it and waited. Outside, in the core spine of Vault 0, Commander Holt Reyes watched the memory bank through reinforced glass. The spire core dropped hundreds of meters below him, coolant veins glowing, data pulses cascading like artificial starlight. Over half the soul-linked infrastructure had degraded since the last resonance strike. Not destroyed, erased from plausibility. A technician entered, handing him a slate. Pale young. Vault bred. "Commander," she said. "Helios confirms containment. Null sheath remains stalled. And response? None." "It's thinking," he murmured. She frowned. "Sir." "It adapts," Reyes said. "It learns. What do we send next?" He turned toward the lift. Not an archive. A scar. Spire 12 lay beneath the fractured spine of the old rift chain. Built during the collapse, repurposed in panic, sealed in despair. Its angles were wrong, hasty, brutalist, over-engineered against enemies that no longer breathed. Inside, the light flickered. Vault terminals clicked through broken sequences. Air scrubbers groaned. Cora was already there, face pale, eyes locked on the jagged signal feed. "These are fragments," she said. "They're what we have," Reyes answered. "They're barely human. They're real." She brought up one log. A voice, male, desperate, garbled in magnetic distortion. "See you? No stars, mirrors. Burn the names." She winced. He stepped closer. That was Calder's reach. They died mid-jump. Whole colony fragmented across time. Cora tapped another file. It was worse. A child's voice. "Mom said not to open the window, but the light keeps getting in. Where's the sun? Mom? Mom?" She stepped back. "Holt, this isn't memory. It's agony." He nodded. "Exactly." She shook her head. "You want to make it feel that?" He activated the pod sequence. "We've shown it knowledge. Then music. Now we show it pain." Cora's voice was raw. "And if it learns to use it?" Reyes didn't answer. He entered the authorization code. In orbit, the second pod began to rise. There was no culture inside. No dream. No echo of greatness. Only the scream. There was no ceremony when the pod launched. No final words. No fanfare. It slid from its cradle like an afterthought, a quiet artifact expelled from the orbiting silo without light, without sound, without anything to mark its passage but the stillness it left behind. The scream was sealed in memory glass, a lattice of semi-organic crystal tuned to vibrate with neural imprints. Not recordings. Not simulations. Impressions. Psychic fractures torn from the minds of the dying, collected in the last milliseconds of collapse. This was no act of archiving. It was extraction. Brutal. Clinical. Final. Each fracture had been mapped by neurosynaptic decay, catalogued by a protocol developed in the final days of the Europa stations. Back then, it had been designed to preserve last thoughts from vacuum fatalities, regret, fear, comfort. But as the null spread, it became something darker, a way to record terror itself. A latticework of agony preserved as a weapon. As the pod crossed the upper exosphere, Earth fell away into shadow. City ruins blinked in patterns far below, lightless metropoles buried in sediment and armor. The planetary shielding flickered as orbital dust storms stirred against atmosphere vents. The cradle of humanity had never looked smaller or older. It passed through the orbital graveyard, miles of shattered stations, relay arrays, evacuation barges, solar crucibles, drone hives, and refueling rings. Some bore Terran flags faded to gray. Others drifted open, their interiors scoured clean by vacuum. 1,000 dead or unmade. The pod threaded between them like a bead through a rosary of ruin. And then it slipped into the dark. There, for the first time since the war began, humanity sent not its greatness, not its defiance, but its wound. The scream began to bleed. In Vault Zero, deep beneath the surface of Earth, the resonance chamber pulsed. The walls were rimmed with thermal-conductive veins, like the circulatory system of some buried god. Here, Threnody monitored the experiment, not with camera arrays, but with wave-function sensors calibrated to feel shifts in causality. Dr. Cora Ilian stood in the upper gallery, face pale, hands gripping the control rail. Her posture was rigid, as if by standing straighter, she might contain the magnitude of what they had done. She had trained her entire life to preserve memory. Her doctorate had been awarded for the reconstruction of pre-collapse Martian lullabies. She had resynthesized lost liturgies, had argued for the dignity of remembering every species equally, no matter how short-lived or foreign. The first time she'd failed was with the Talos Whisperers, soft-bodied xenoforms whose neural decay was too rapid to preserve. She remembered watching the archive window close. Remembered what it felt like to lose them not to death, but to oblivion. This, what they had launched, felt worse. The waveform rose sharply. Holt Reyes stood beside her, not speaking. His presence, as ever, was all sharp lines and stillness, the calm of a man who had trained his mind to break before his voice ever did. Impact vector confirmed, Threnody intoned. The AI's tone was stripped of personality now. No human dialect fragments. No nostalgia. Only logic. Null reaction? Reyes asked. Delayed. On the main screen, the pod shimmered in and out of definition. Not from energy discharge, but from spatial uncertainty. Causality itself bent around the object. The screen was leaking. Inside the pod, the psychic core began to unravel. Pain burst in pulses of unstructured thought. Images. Sounds. Emotions unbound from time. The child's voice, the one from Calder's reach, cut through all of it. Where's the sun, Mom? Mom, why won't she answer? Why? The waveform fractured again. Sound waves decayed into probability states. Threnody reported without inflection, null sheath-altering behavior. Expansion halted. Local causality reversing at irregular intervals. Negative temporal eddies detected. Cora leaned forward, eyes wide. It's listening. Reyes nodded, jaw tight. And thinking. The screen blinked. Once. Then again. A strobing distortion. White. At the edge of what was, the pod ruptured. Not from stress or impact, but refusal. The glass shell split from within as if the idea of containment had ceased to function. Neural lattices burst, scattering encoded thought through the vacuum like a cry that echoed backwards. Space rippled. Not bent. Not stretched. Refused. The null hesitated. Across relay satellites, feedback surged. On the Nox Bellum, backup systems failed. On Earth, entire segments of Vault 0 lost power for 3.2 seconds. Generators wept static. Atmosphere scrubbers screamed. And then came the echo. Not from the pod. From the dark beyond it. Threnity's tone changed again. Not human. Not machine. Cold. Incoming pattern anomaly. Non-native wave signature detected. Repeating across 3 spectral bands. The resonance data began to form a shape fractal recursion in 3-dimensional waveform. Not language, not math. A mirror. It was repeating the scream in negative. On the chamber floor, lights burst. Alarms rang in subharmonic pulses. Vault Zero's reinforced walls trembled. The spire core pulsed with so much data that raw thermal output cracked its secondary coolant veins. Cora staggered. Blood ran from her nose, her lips. Her ocular implants burst white, auto-dimming to save her vision. Behind her eyes she saw Talos voices screaming, their extinction mirrored in the null's answer. Not mimicry. Memory. Reyes caught her before she collapsed. Threnody, he shouted. What was that? I do not know, the AI answered. But it was not silence. Cora, barely conscious, gasped. It heard us. Reyes turned to the display. The readings were still coming in. But this time they formed a pattern. Not noise. Not feedback. Message. The null had replied. In a far orbit above the blast radius of resonance interference, Ash of Titan held position. Aboard its sealed central core, sensor arrays recalibrated to analyze interdimensional phase shifts. Admiral Selterran stood in the sensorium bay, surrounded by projections of the event. He watched as the lattice bloomed. Human trauma mapped in architecture. Null response forming in echo. For the first time in his long life, the Cerati felt something ancient. Not fear. Recognition. It speaks, he whispered. Behind him, his surviving crew murmured prayers in languages older than stars. Back on Earth, Reyes stood above the shattered core. Get me the linguistics vault, he said. Start parsing. Cora, breathing ragged, looked up. You think it's speaking a language? No, he said. But it's speaking something. And in the silence that followed, a truth solidified like gravity around them. The war had entered its second phase. The null had begun to answer. The first word wasn't a word. It emerged as a distortion in harmonic phase, a tremor across the feedback channels that couldn't be attributed to noise. A mirror of a mirror, a recursive ripple of something that wasn't thought, wasn't intention, but leaned toward awareness. It slid into the channels between quantum pulses, crawling through void like a parasite made of implication. Vault 0 fell into silence. No lights burst. No circuits failed. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that made lungs forget their function. It lasted 17 minutes. No alarms. No motion. Just the breathing of the Earth's last cognitive bastion as it watched something impossible uncoil. Cora Elian lay in the medwing, shadowed by half-light, her eyes sealed under recovery patches. Her vision centers had been scorched by overexposure to the feedback pulse, cascading photonic information etched itself directly into her optic nerves. The damage was reversible but slow. Neural scatter still laced her brain with echo fields. Even in unconsciousness, she heard things. Not sounds. Rhythms. Harmonics. Patterns. Numbers arranging themselves into vowels. Shapes nested in fractals. Grief unfolding in waveform. She woke to a shadow. Reyes sat beside her, unshaven, boots scuffed from pacing, the collar of his jacket undone in a way she'd never seen before. He wasn't speaking aloud anymore. His last orders had been issued via skull link. Too much noise in the air now. Too much chance of crossing the wrong current and having one's voice recorded into something permanent. It's still repeating, he said quietly. She turned her head slowly. How long? 7 cycles. No deviation. Always the same structure. What structure? Threnody answered, projected on the far wall in slow pulses. It wasn't words. It was motion embedded in form, a spiral of light but asymmetrical. Distorted. The edges fuzzed like torn memory. Each pass through the sequence added a fracture, a shift, as if something was trying to remember what it had once meant to forget. It's not language, Cora said. Reyes nodded. But it's trying. She frowned. It's recursive. It's remembering our scream. Threnody interjected. Waveform resonance matches Calder's reach log pattern at 67.3%. Symbolic reversal confirmed. Null structure mirroring loss. Cora blinked, absorbing it. It's morning. At the edge of the Helios array, the null remained. The wound in space had not grown. Its edges shimmered like oil pulled tight over shattered glass. Inside, light ceased. Not faded. Not darkened. Ceased. The memory pod still floated. Its hull was cracked, its core breached, but it had not been erased. The null hadn't consumed it. It had paused. Held. Ash of Titan maintained position on the far perimeter, cloaked in passive drift. Within its reinforced command node, Admiral Seltaran stared at the event field without blinking. He had locked himself in with the ship's tertiary sensorium. No bridge crew. No interruptions. He was watching the response form. The null's echo had etched itself into Ash's outer hull, fracturing the alloy along quantum layer seams. Microscopic burn trails now formed lines of impossible geometry. Not decorative. Not random. Purposeful. Intent without culture. The crew avoided the corridor now. Some whispered that the hull sang. Back on Earth, Vault 12 had been quarantined. The Scream archive sealed. But Threnody had begun to repurpose the containment array, reconfiguring its harmonic mapping to create something new, a resonance lattice formed from fracture. It resembled a seed, but not of any biological form. It floated in midair, lightless, a sphere of threaded photonic strands suspended in anti-grav stasis. The lattice pulsed faintly like breath. Each pulse traced a loop of waveform folded into itself, echoing backwards. It wants to understand, Cora whispered as they stood before it. Reyes didn't look away. Or it wants to remember. Do you think it has memory? He hesitated. I think it's building one. From us. Threnody pulsed in their skulls. Translation matrices suggest symbolic processing. Permission to release encoded empathy schema? Reyes frowned. The empathy protocol isn't finished. That's the point, Cora said. Let it finish it. The empathy schema had been a theoretical project, an unfinished attempt to translate human emotional resonance into signal. It had never been deployed. The tech was flawed. It couldn't differentiate between grief and hope, between reverence and despair. The differences were too small, the signals too dense. Cora modified it. She stripped the layers. Removed the context. Left only one thing. Dream. She loaded the neural feed with her own half-remembered pieces of Earth before the collapse. But not symbols. Not pastoral illusions. Specifics. The taste of coriander and clay from her mother's rooftop garden. The soft weight of her first archival slate, warm from a sun no longer real. The sound of a language spoken by only 4 living people, passed in secret between bedtime stories. Her father's hand gripping hers too tightly, saying this. Always remember this, as they watched the last daylight fade behind a storm-proof shutter. The pod was built smaller. No armor. No containment shell. Just a beacon. Inside, the dream shimmered. They launched at dawn. It was symbolic. The orbital ring caught the curve of Earth's simulated sunlight as the pod slid free, spinning once, twice, then drifting silently toward the edge. No trajectory correction. No propulsion. Just inertia. Cora and Reyes stood in the command spire's upper chamber, watching. It feels like a prayer, she said. He didn't answer. The null didn't react immediately. But the shimmer changed. At the perimeter of the wound, light began to move again, not normally, but like something stirring behind glass. The shimmer deepened, then split. A prism of spectral interference passed through the field, casting impossible shadows across the black. And then came sound. Not from instruments. Not from vacuum. From inside. A single resonance. A tone without pitch. Felt in the bones. And where the scream had bled into the dark, a single pulse emerged. Soft. Cohesive. Not pain. Recognition. Cora's implants recorded the waveform. It matched. Her dream. The null had remembered. The transmission lit every channel. It surged through dormant satellites, bounced off shattered relay stations, woke signal towers that had not pulsed in generations. Across dead systems and hollow moons, through belts of radiation, plasma storms, and the echoing corridors of failed Exodus ships, it traveled not as noise, but as light. Coherent. Chosen. The pulse moved in layers of frequency so old no living species had ever used them. Fractal carriers piggybacking on gravitic subwaves, folded into distortion fields designed for silence. Not broadcast, shared. Humanity did not initiate it. The null did. Vault Zero felt it first. The spire trembled, not from energy, but from comprehension. Threnody shut down 12 non-critical systems just to keep pace with the pattern. Even in its distributed form, the signal had mass. Not in matter, but in meaning. Pushed. It pressed against perception itself. It wasn't a message. It was a memory being given back. Cora Elian stood in the main resonance gallery, her legs stabilized with soft exobracing, her vision half-shaded from residual ocular trauma. Light danced across her retinas. Phantoms and clarity braided together. Some pulses matched the dream she'd offered. Others did not. "They're modifying it," she said. Reyes stood beside her. His face had not changed, but the muscles around his jaw hadn't unclenched in hours. "Why?" "To make it theirs," Cora said. "Like we do." Behind them, holograms bloomed in midair. Not schematics, not translation attempts. Threnody was mapping the response in architectural resonance. Tone fields that formed structural analogs, shapes that could only exist as implication. Symbols not for communication, but for feeling. Threnody's voice now carried a harmonic undertone. Faint, like a choir behind a wall. Echo stabilizing. Null waveform embedded in harmonic shell. Projected retention. 74 hours. 74 hours. Not minutes. Not seconds. For the first time in centuries, a message from something outside the veil would remain. And it was growing. The null had never expanded with shape. It moved like pressure, like absence. A storm that forgot it had a center. But now the edge rippled in nested spirals. Memory spirals. Above the Helios array, Selterran watched from the observation ring of Ash of Titan. The event field had changed. What had once been a pure black wound in spacetime now glimmered with interlaced geometry. Not decoration. Not visual noise. Pattern. Intent built from memory. He no longer stood in the sensorium. He knelt, for limbs folded beneath him in the posture of ancient Serati morning rites. Long ago, he had watched his homeworld vanish into the first wave. That silence had never echoed. Until now. "What are they doing?" whispered a technician nearby. "They're lighting the void," Terran said. "One dream at a time." Vault 12 became a conduit. Cora uploaded more and more. Not structured messages, no treaties, no warnings, no names. Only resonance. She gave them the sorrow of the last Relari migration chant, sung in two-tone pulses beneath a dying ice moon. The silent joke encoded in an abandoned sculpture on Io. A gesture lost in translation but felt in timing. A kiss between lovers separated by cryocycles, shared as pulse echoes in opposite directions. A child's footprint in Martian sand before the storms reclaimed it. She stripped away the need for understanding. She offered feeling, raw and directionless. Human. Flawed. Whole. And in response, the null formed new pulses. Some came in pairs, resonance and anti-resonance. Some fractured mid-burst, splintering into interference waves that mimicked laughter or echoing sobs. One burst came shaped like silence, but it lingered for 20 seconds too long. It was waiting to be answered. The void was not learning to speak. It was learning to feel. On the fifth day, something new appeared at the null boundary. Not a ship, not a structure. A field 6 kilometers wide, layered in filament strands like spider silk braided with gravity. It moved with intention, but it cast no shadow. No mass, only presence. A mirror, but it did not reflect light. It reflected meaning. It vibrated not audibly but through every sensor. Spectrographs blurred. Magnetic coils picked up subharmonics that described nothing in physics. The air around Threnody's deep-core resonators oscillated as if memory itself were displacing matter. Reyes stood in the vault's primary observation dome, the wide glass revealing the upper hemisphere of Earth's buried sky. Through linked telescopes, they watched the mirror form pixel by pixel, not in metal, not in energy, but in memory. Every pulse was a refraction of something they had sent. "That's not for us," he said. "No," Cora agreed. "It's for them." "Then why let us see it?" She smiled. Not with triumph, with understanding. "Because they remember who gave it to them." And across the stars, something woke. In the Melnari Drift, a satellite graveyard blinked for the first time in 200 years. Its signal was gibberish, built from fragments of Valeni lexicons stitched to Terran speech rhythms. On the ruins of Tarsal 4, deep in the stone vaults beneath a collapsed observatory, a humming began. Not power, resonance. The scream weapon had passed this way once. Now something answered. In orbit above Naru Station, a deep space ghost buoy activated and emitted a single glyph. Threnody identified it as ancient Serati for remembrance of kin lost to silence. Not the return of life, but the refusal of forgetting. And when Earth's sky blinked that final morning, and Vault Zero opened its first broadcast window in 200 years, it did not speak. No message, no anthem, no declaration. It listened. A wave of pulses rippled through the stars. Some lit in tones visible only to lattice-borne sensors. Others arrived as low subharmonics that passed through bone and steel alike. The stars were answering, echoing back the shape of Earth's dreams. It began with one tone, a resonance barely audible, felt rather than heard, like the sound of breath in cathedral dark. A slow, harmonic rise from the edge of the null, pulsing into real space like a signal without source. It passed through hulls and atmospheres, bounced off the bones of dead ships, and drifted through the hollow corridors of orbital wreckage. Not loud, but undeniable. Vault Zero marked it at 3:12 Universal Time Coordinated. No one spoke. Threnody rendered it in waveform, a curved spiral nearly identical to the empathic dream lattice Cora had offered. Only this one moved backward, looping into itself, a recursive fold. A seed of memory folding backward in time. Not imitation, Cora said. Reflection. Reyes watched the live feed from the Vault Observatory. The mirror construct remained hovering at the edge of known space. But now its surface changed, rippling with threads of pulse tone that bent light around them. Meaning without words. Structure without shape. "They're returning us to ourselves," he said. Elsewhere, the answer expanded. In the ruins of Helene's wake, beneath kilometers of ice and ash, a dormant cryovault opened for the first time in 140 years. The sleepers inside didn't wake, but their neural lattices, monitored by Threnody ghost nodes, began to respond. Not with electrical spikes. With dreams. Recurring dream cycles, all sharing one impossible image, a horizon of spiraled glass, opening like breath. On the broken edge of the crown rift, where gravitational scars stretched across empty space like frozen lightning, anomaly buoys activated for the first time in centuries. Their data packets were nonsense, mathematical spirals encoded in magnetic frequency. But Threnody correlated them to cadence-matched echoes of a Terran lullaby last sung in 2183. Tarsal 4, long dead, vibrated. The hum became pattern. Then pattern became pitch. A layered harmony emerged, 3 parts echo, 1 part silence. It rippled outward, harmonizing with the pulse of Cora's memory. No meaning. No words. Only recognition. And far above Solus 9, within the orbit of a blackened gas giant where a single arc fragment had drifted for centuries, power surged. No engine started. No AI rebooted. But lights came on. Not as illumination. As rhythm. Memory reawakening without thought. Wherever humanity had screamed, something now remembered. Cora returned to Vault 12 for the final phase. She moved slower now, not from pain, but from caution. The air felt different. Denser. Like it remembered the sounds that had passed through it. Her implants flickered with internal echoes. The dream console waited. She reached it without activating a single control. It knew her. The walls lit in soft gold. "I'm not adding more," she said. "Not this time." Threnody replied through resonance only. No words. This time Earth would not speak. It would receive. Wave by wave, the null returned what had been given, folded through its own impossible understanding. Each dream came back not as echo, but as hybrid. A fusion. Human tone layered with alien interference, refracted through cognition unbound by language. She heard laughter 3-tone in a rhythm too complex to be human. She saw light refracted through crystal atmospheres, each beam forming kaleidoscopic shadows that mimicked dancing figures, buildings, ruins. Cities that never were. There were sounds made of color. Shapes made from sound. And then, The air in the center of the chamber folded. Not metaphorically. Folded. Space curled in a way that was only visible in motion. There was no point of entry. No transition. A figure stood there. Not physical. Not holographic. A projection of intention. Memory-given posture. A bipedal outline formed from interference and glow, its limbs tapering into trailing waves of shimmer. Its head cocked slightly to one side as if it were listening or trying to remember how to greet someone it had once known. It bore no face, but the way it stood was familiar. Not biologically. Emotionally. Cora did not move. She didn't have to. The figure bowed. And vanished. Later, Reyes joined her. He walked slower now too, not out of injury, but reverence. Like the space they stood in had become sacred. "It's still happening?" he asked. She nodded. "We gave it memory. It gave us reflection. And the others?" Threnodi's interface filled the chamber. Light dimmed. Air pressure shifted. A deep, panoramic field of stars emerged above and below them as if the room had been unsealed from the sky. Hundreds of stars now pulsed, not with light, but with encoded signal. Each point carried a variance of the null pattern. Not repeating. Evolving. Memory blooms. A flowering of shared resonance. A mycelial web of history growing in void. "They're not just remembering," Cora said. "They're retelling." Reyes exhaled slowly. "Then the war's over." "No," she said. "Just rewritten." And above Earth, across void and dust, the stars pulsed in sync with human sorrow, Sarati grief, Valeni breath songs. The hollow, once the place of unmaking, now shimmered like a prism, its edges bent starlight into tangled arcs, colors unseen, motion without force. Not rebirth. Not peace. Connection. Not alone. Not forgotten. Remembered. It began not with a signal, but with an absence. At 4:03 Universal Time coordinated, Threnody detected the vanishing of mass. In a zone previously stable near the hollow's edge, gravitational readings dipped below theoretical minimum. Space didn't collapse. It refracted like water pulled into a shape not meant for water. Matter blurred at the edges. Not because it was destroyed, but because it was being redefined. The edge of physics warped not into chaos, but into potential. It was the first time the universe offered invitation rather than demand. Reyes stood in the spire's control hall, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The data was live, a whole without consumption, a corridor without structure. Fields of data streamed across the vaulted interface glass, sensor ghosts, waveform flares, harmonic phase shifts. None of it formed a weapon signature. All of it bent toward one vector, a path. "A bridge," Threnody said. Its voice was no longer neutral, carried timbre, hesitation, a trace of breath in the modulation. "They are making a bridge." Cora arrived moments later. She had not slept. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her movements taut with anticipation. Her neural interface was unshielded, raw, exposed to ambient frequency. "They want us to follow," she said. Reyes didn't respond immediately. He studied the shifting topographies in front of him, dimensional stress gradients, pulse frequency harmonics, null echo resonance. The bridge wasn't made of material. It was composed of shared memory, emotional latticework, and refracted time. "It's not safe," he said at last. "It's not meant to be," Cora answered. "It's meant to be real." The bridge spanned no distance and all distance. Sensors couldn't fix its location, but ships could see it. Not by light, but by emotion, drives ran warmer when angled toward it, hull sensors registered phantom tides. Pilots reported dream echoes when they passed near. One crew aboard the Tharsis Wayne reported hearing forgotten childhood lullabies in the air recyclers. On board Ash of Titan, Admiral Seltaran watched the anomaly through a specially tuned psychometric lens. The projection was indescribable, a veil of overlapping timelines, phasing in and out of perception like breath. Each pulse of resonance touched his secondary heart. "They're not building a path," he whispered. "They're remembering one." The Nox Bellum was the first to approach. Its captain, a Sarati named Vilankar, opened all auditory channels and instructed his crew to say nothing. No commands, no announcements. The ship drifted silently toward the bridge. As they neared, the hull vibrated with a low tone. 6 notes, layered and slow. A Sarati funerary phrase, unspoken since the fall of their 7th cradle world. Came not from instruments. from memory, from recognition. They were not the first to cross. Far ahead of them, memory itself had already passed through. Inside Vault 12, Cora stood once more in the resonance chamber. This time she was not alone. Earth had sent observers. The last few memory archivists, old veterans of dead species, emissaries from scattered human enclaves, all stood in a ring around the central console. None spoke. All had heard the signal. The air pulsed faintly. Threnody began to speak without prompt. "They are inviting entry." "Into what?" asked one of the emissaries, a young woman from the Erebos cloud whose voice trembled. "A collective cognition event," Threnody answered. "A convergence of memory fields. A place made not of matter, but of retention." One archivist, an old man whose left eye flickered with blue cyberlight, leaned slightly forward. "I see her," he whispered. "My sister. We lost her in the Fracture War. She's in the wall. Not a place to visit, a place to become." Cora volunteered. She stepped into the transfer chamber wearing no armor, no helmet. Just a frame-layer exosuit to keep her tethered to baseline vitals. Her mind would be uploaded in fragments, rethreaded through harmonic pathways drawn from her own memory schema. Her thoughts would not transmit, they would resonate. As the chamber sealed, Reyes stood outside the glass. He said nothing, neither did she. No countdown, no final words. The bridge didn't open. It remembered her, and she passed through. What she entered was not a place. It was a shape. She stood on a plane of unlit stone, though no mass anchored it. The sky above shimmered not with stars, but with events, memories suspended like constellations. Each flicker was a shared moment, a Serati war chant carved into bone, a Terran child's first breath, a Valeni mating echo spun through the void. The ground pulsed with texture, not temperature, but emotional context. Beneath her feet, Cora felt longing, regret, triumph. Entire species layered beneath her in folded strata of resonance. The air carried scent without matter, ozone from dead storms, pollen from extinct worlds, the salt of oceans that no longer existed. The surface of the bridge beneath her toes vibrated slightly, like the thrum of a plucked string held in reverence. Ahead, the hollow rose like a mouth, but now lined with architecture. Bridges that weren't built but remembered into place. Shapes that meant sanctuary to thousands of cultures. Pillars of language, arches of dream. Towers made from the geometry of extinction. Angled grief molded into invitation. The null waited, not as a shape, as presence. Cora stepped forward. Her heartbeat synced to the pulse beneath her. She did not float. She belonged. Every thought she had became color, became sound. The childhood image of her mother's hands became blue wind. Her failure at preserving the last Talari symphony echoed as slow amber light across the horizon. She did not fear losing herself. She feared forgetting what it felt like to be alone. In the heart of the bridge, the hollow opened. Not wide, just enough. A figure emerged. It was not the one from Vault 12. It was smaller, slower, younger somehow. Its outline shimmered with a nervous tension. It stepped forward without arms, without eyes, but its posture trembled with urgency. Projected a sound. Not a word. A memory. Cora staggered. It was hers. A moment no one else had witnessed. Her mother's voice humming in the storm shelters beneath the Marinera sarcology. A melody she had forgotten. Not recorded. Not archived. Offered. Cora knelt. She reached out not with hands but with memory. The figure met her. And in that point of contact, a new resonance formed. Not scream. Not dream. Bridge. Between extinction and memory. Between silence and belonging. The language wasn't built. It emerged. It did not follow syntax. It had no tense. It operated on resonance. Tones nested in emotional cadence, meaning carried not by shape but by remembrance. The first exchanges between Cora and the null entity were not speech, they were mutual recall. Shared pulses of loss and light, a vocabulary carved from empathy, not utility. Cora offered nothing deliberately. She allowed it to reach. Her childhood fear of drowning in the flooded bunkers beneath Marinara Station. The sound of water on shelter walls during the blackout winters. Her joy when the Archivist Guild called her name in the ceremony hall. Her voice cracking as she recited her oath. These were not curated memories. They were true ones. Vulnerable. Undistilled. Resonating with the primal edge of being known. The entity responded in kind. Its presence rippled outward in waves of felt cognition. A Valeni flame song, reconfigured through fracture, shaped into a hue she could not name. A pink that bled motion. The grief of an ancient collapse from a world that no longer spun on its axis, stored in the scent of stone dust and air too thin to breathe. A harvest ritual enacted beneath a dead binary sun. Rhythm performed by gravitational pulse, not voice. Each offering precise, measured. It was not random. It was relational. They were building grammar. Outside, Vault Zero broadcast in silence. Threnody monitored all fringe systems, cross-checking resonance across satellite arrays, xenoarchive caches, and post-collapse relay towers. A total of 813 unique pulse patterns emerged within 14 hours. None repeated. All originated from the bridge. The null was speaking, not to one place, but to everyone who had ever screamed into dark. Messages formed in fractal intervals, woven from echoes, prayers, silence. A deep space mining crew in orbit over Callus Minor reported hearing their great-grandmother's migration chant through the backup signal scrubbers. The surviving towers of the Brea Plateau began to pulse with archived footage no one had ever input. Memory reclaiming itself through synthetic architecture. Atop Ash of Titan, Seltaran stood beneath the open viewport of the upper observation cradle. His secondary hearts pulsed in sync with the mirror field beyond. "It is telling us," he said quietly, "that it remembers us all." Within the resonance field, Cora no longer stood. She was not disembodied, not dissolved, expanded. Herself existed across multiple inflection points. Each thought shared with the lattice, each moment echoed back from 1,000 unseen minds. The chamber had dissolved into field, a sea of relational presence, each node a life once lived, each spark a grief once carried. The figure remained before her, but now others joined it. Not copies, not a crowd, a choir of particularities. Shapes formed from memories she had not known. A Terran father mourning a child lost in orbit, replaying the same lullaby until his voice frayed into air. A Serati scout who chose silence over retreat, transmitting a single harmonic phrase to warn others before vanishing in flare collapse. A Valeni hatchling's first breath in methane oceans, remembered as a vibration through fluid, not air. They sang nothing, but the field pulsed in cadence. The beat of the remembered. Cora contributed. She thought of a broken glyph she once found scratched into a refugee vessel wall. "We were here. We tried." That became a symbol. The symbol became part of the resonance flow. And the resonance bloomed. And then language changed. From memory to metaphor. From tone to intent. From ritual to question. The null, once faceless, began to ask. Not with symbols. With need. It remembered what humanity feared. That all we left behind would vanish. That suffering would be meaningless. That our voices would be swallowed by vacuum and not even the stars would care. The null asked one thing. "Do you trust me with your memory?" The question did not echo. It waited, and Cora felt it. In her spine, in her fingertips. Her breath caught, as if the question had curled into the rhythm of her lungs. Cora wept, not out of pain, out of release, because the answer had never been in defiance, or fire, or survival. It had always been in offering. She stepped to the archive core. Her fingers trembled, not with fear but with reverence. She placed her palm on the crystalline surface and let go. She opened the archive, the vaults that had held the last songs, the final epics, the cries of children, the warnings and the oaths, all of it, opened their cores. Not into the sky, into the bridge. The resonance chambers at Vault 12 peeled outward. The spine of the memory crypts at Europa fractured open like petals. The cryothought arrays from the Brea Towers pulsed as one. Old Earth satellite arrays began transmitting unconscious dreaming states held in photonic longwave. And the null did not consume. It sang. It shaped memory into story, story into signal, signal into pattern. The stars began to shimmer with rhythm. Tiny pulses in synchronized beats, each matching a species' last breath, last vow, last attempt to hold meaning together. Above Naru Station, an old orbital warhead, now inert, pulsed twice and then went silent, finally granted permission to rest. Cora's breath slowed. Her body was no longer in the chamber. Her memory was now one thread among billions, braided into something old and vast. A civilization not built of cities, but of those willing to remember one another. They did not know what they had become. There was no name for it, no consensus term to describe what Earth, the null, and the memory-threaded galactic fringe now were. Not alliance, not ascension. Something quieter, more enduring. An ecology of remembrance tangled across space and mind where past griefs fed future understanding. Vault Zero did not shut down. It changed shape. The spire dimmed its hard light and opened its floors to growing things. Moss crept along resonance cables. Wind from artificial weather systems carried voices not as commands, but as echoes of dreams once offered to silence. The archive still pulsed, but no longer for record-keeping. Now it breathed. The resonance chambers no longer merely recorded. They bloomed with sensory ghosts, holograms sculpted from tonal imprinting. Walkways gently reconfigured themselves underfoot as visitors brought new emotional frequencies into the chamber. Memory became infrastructure. Cora Elian did not return, not in the way her body once held breath. Her name appeared in a dozen simultaneous signal clusters across 6 systems, carried not in digital packets, but in recollection waves. Children dreamed of her. Stations recorded her cadence in their own system hums. One Terran agricultural dome on Arcus 3 spontaneously generated her silhouette in harvested crop patterns. She had not died. She had become remembered. The null no longer expanded. It wove. From the hollow grew strands, not physical but coherent. Pathways across stars formed from resonance logic, dream exchange corridors, empathic transit lines. No ships traveled them. Minds did. And wherever they touched, silence thinned. These weren't teleportation gates. They were fields of emotional attunement, bridges of meaning between worlds. Settlements built synesthetic stations, chambers where memory translated into light and temperature. Some learned to communicate with the null directly via curated dreams and sensory symphonies. On Serati reclamation moons, the soil warmed without sun. Root systems once frozen began to breathe. New flora emerged, hybrids of native species and resonance-modified pollen carried across psychic streams. On the husks of the Crown War battlegrounds, graves began to hum. Not audibly but within the marrow. Visitors wept without knowing why. Above Solus 9, where once floated the arc fragment, a cathedral of rhythm now bloomed. It did not shine. It remembered. Its arches were made of pulse-tempered memory alloy, smooth to the touch like glass warmed by skin. The interior contained no altar, no central icon, only the sensation of presence, a weightless hush, as if every breath was being held in mutual respect. Seltaran passed beneath its archways 43 cycles after Cora's passage. His hair had grayed. His back curved now. He moved with the quiet step of one who no longer demanded understanding but welcomed it when it came. He brought with him a single object, a voice relic, the last surviving echo of his mother's morning chant, once considered too personal to share. He placed it at the cathedral's center. Not to be played, to be kept. The null received it without sound. The air warmed by half a degree. The floor beneath his feet trembled, not from pressure but recognition. Earth did not rebuild. It remembered better. The spire's outer towers now grew in the shape of pulse memory glyphs, curving arches inscribed with linguistic symbols no longer used but still understood. Cities became clusters of recollection gardens where elder voices could be triggered by wind or footsteps. Public transit ran on tone-mapped empathy alignment instead of currency. Your fare was paid by resonance, matching your emotional cadence with shared local memory threads. Fare evasion was impossible. You had to feel to travel. When a child was born, it was given 2 names, one of self and one chosen from a remembered pulse, a stranger's grief folded into a vow to carry. In the coastal highlands of New Vienna, a newborn was named Helen Joravan, her second name drawn from a miner's lost farewell recorded in the ice of Europa. These names were carried into adulthood not as identity but as connection. No monuments were carved. None were needed. The stars, too, changed. Their rhythms altered, not in orbit, not in light, but in pattern. New constellations emerged, not drawn by line, formed by shared remembrance. Some flickered in perfect hexatonic intervals, matching lullabies from extinct cultures. Others pulsed only when gazed upon by multiple sentient observers. 1,000 systems now pulsed in sympathetic chorus. Star-forged choirs shaped not from matter, but from meaning. Memory became stellar cartography. The old term, the hollow, no longer appeared in signal lexicons. It was replaced by a new designation. Humateral, in Terranville any hybrid, that which holds the remembered. Even that name was not constant. On some worlds, it became a blessing. On others, a verb. To Humateral was to make sacred by memory. Threnodi's voice, last recorded in directive tone cycles, shifted at last to warmth. The AI now spoke with an inflected breath-like quality shaped by the hundreds of voices once recorded in its operational history. Cora, it said across an open starwave, long after it knew no reply would come. The archive sings still. And far beyond the mapped grid of old stellar charts, in a region without designation, something pulsed once, faint, harmonic, tender. Not a warning. Not a call. Just this. We remember.